When Avatar Frontiers of Pandora was first revealed, I was stunned. It was the first year of current-gen consoles' life cycle, I was starving to see what a true 9th-gen game could look like, and the trailer fully delivered. At first, I thought Ubisoft was planning to release the game alongside Avatar's second movie to benefit from the hype, but then it went silent, skipped the movie entirely, and was eventually released in December 2023. Once it was released, a few things became clear. Firstly, the game looked unbelievably gorgeous. Secondly, it felt like Far Cry's formula heavily inspired it. But more importantly, it seemed like Frontiers of Pandora just failed to remain relevant at all. This was a game based on a huge IP, a game that used a familiar gameplay formula and received lots of praise for its visuals from the likes of Digital Foundry. But as I played it, I finally understood why Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, despite all its potential, failed to matter. Okay, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this at all. I've played countless games with good, mediocre, or downright awful stories. And when I say Avatar Frontiers of Pandora has some of the worst narrative, writing, and characters I've encountered in a very long time, I'm not exaggerating one bit. Let's be brutally honest. The Avatar movies, while visually spectacular, aren't exactly Shakespeare when it comes to their narratives. They're fairly standard science fiction fare, and some even call them mediocre, but I personally enjoyed them for what they were. But for this game to sink below that standard, to hit new lows in storytelling, that takes a special kind of talent. The story is about a group of Na'vi children, including you, who were kidnapped by humans to be educated in human ways. Now years later, you're free and fighting against the RDA, led by a cartoonishly evil bad guy named Mercer. The story jumps around a bit, starting before the first movie and moving into the timeline of the second, but it carefully avoids any meaningful overlap with characters from the movies. Aside from a few name drops, Jake Sully and the company are ghosts. It's a standalone story, and boy, is it riddled with problems. Firstly, every single plot point is telegraphed from miles away. Any attempt at a narrative twist is so obvious it physically hurts. Secondly, the dialogue. Oh, the dialogue. Characters are bizarrely polite, even in dire situations. They crack some of the most horrendous, cringeworthy jokes I've ever encountered, and keep in mind that I actually like dad jokes and brain rot. But the dialogue in this game made me genuinely feel uncomfortable. The characters often speak in generic platitudes, and there's zero narrative tension or emotional payoff. You're constantly told what to feel and believe, never shown it through meaningful character arcs or compelling moral dilemmas. This game is genuinely fine until someone opens their mouth. The moment dialogue starts, the entire experience nosedives. Part of the problem is the atrocious writing, and while ludonarrative dissonance isn't unique to Frontiers of Pandora or even Ubisoft games in general, in this case it hits harder because of how poorly everything is written. One moment the game asks you to clear out outposts by any means necessary, and the next your main character is behaving and talking like an innocent child despite having just slaughtered a dozen NPCs brutally not 5 minutes ago. Unfortunately, the game is full of these instances. Again, yes, this kind of disconnect between the gameplay and story shows up in other games too, but here it's doubly frustrating because the writing is so weak. Also, the side characters are just as bad, especially the human ones. The Na'vi characters are a bit more tolerable, though none of them stand out either. However, the other major problem with the story is the voice direction, and I do mean direction, not the acting itself. I'll explain why the voice actors aren't necessarily the problem. But before that, let me briefly mention something else. Less than a decade ago, Ubisoft released Far Cry Primal, a game set in prehistoric times. To truly immerse players, they constructed an entire fictional language named Wenja. No one spoke in English, everything was subtitled. It was a bold, brilliant move that showed a level of care and commitment to immersion that frankly feels like a distant memory. Fast forward to today, and we have Avatar, a universe that already has an established native language. We see it in the films. In the game, while you get sprinkles of Na'vi dialogue, the vast majority is spoken in English, often accented English, which just feels off. It's not a deal breaker on its own, but it's another chip away at the precious immersion. Early in the second film, it's quickly explained that we hear characters talking in English for our own convenience, implying that they're actually speaking Na'vi. But how cool would it have been if they pulled the primal for the game? But you know what? I could live with the English if the performances were compelling. Instead, it feels like watching a troupe of emotionless robots. Characters deliver lines as if they're just reading from a script, desperate to get the take over with. And also, the reason it's voice direction and not voice acting is because we have genuinely talented voice actors in the game. Andreas Apergis, for example, who voiced unforgettable characters like Cesare Borgia with his incredible range, plays Mercer, the main villain here. Despite his best efforts, the performance falls flat. This happens because the writing is abysmal and the direction across the entire game is all over the place. This applies to every single character. There's barely a memorable face or line of dialogue in the entire experience. And it doesn't help that many Na'vi NPCs tend to blend together visually due to a lack of distinct character design, unlike the more curated cast in the movies. The films managed to make their core Na'vi cast distinct with clothing, unique features, scars, and powerful vocal performances. The game has so many more characters that you'll struggle to care about or even remember most of them. Also, let's not forget the motion capture and facial animation, which, like many modern Ubisoft titles, is often terrible. Characters just stand there performing ultra-robotic gestures with minimal facial expression. You can rarely tell what emotion they're even trying to convey. I could maybe overlook this in another open-world Ubisoft game, but this is Avatar, a franchise practically defined by its groundbreaking visual fidelity and expressive character animation. In the movies, you could read every nuanced emotion on Neytiri's face thanks to Zoe Saldana's performance, but you won't find anything similar in the game. Just for the record, I'm not expecting a one-to-one match in a real-time rendered video game. But the video game industry is full of titles from cross-gen games, 8th-gen titles, and even multi-platform games from the 7th console generation, or hell, even older Ubisoft games that have delivered far more impressive facial animation and motion capture performances. For some reason, maybe to cut development time and budget, we're stuck with this. It's not just cutscenes, by the way. In-game character animations are equally repetitive and immersion-breaking. Yes, there are a handful of cutscenes that look a little bit better, but they're the exception, not the rule. Unfortunately, it's the harsh reality. This game, like so many from Ubisoft lately, does not feel handled with care. It lacks quality where it matters the most for this IP. The story is uninspiring, the characters are forgettable, the writing is poor, and ultimately they fail to do justice to this visually stunning world. You've probably heard the sentiment that Frontiers of Pandora is just Far Cry with an Avatar skin, and well, it's not entirely wrong, but there's a crucial distinction to make. Using a familiar formula isn't inherently bad. The problem is, this game does a terrible job of actually being a Far Cry. It's like they took some of the core Far Cry elements from those games, but then took this conscious decision to ignore some of the best ones in order to respect Avatar's lore. The result is a simplistic, watered down, and deeply uninspiring gameplay. You see, the gameplay tries to be a mix of mainline Far Cry games with a little bit of Far Cry Primal in between, but not in any exciting way you might expect. Your main loop involves cleansing the world of RDA pollution by taking down their outposts. You can go in stealthy or guns blazing, and the main difference is the loot you get. But unfortunately, Avatar is neither a great stealth title nor a great action game. Now, don't get me wrong, the stealth isn't as disastrous as, say, Star Wars Outlaws, but it's aggressively basic, and when you choose the stealth approach, you're more limited in your tools and tactical options than in almost any Far Cry game. Also, there's no dedicated melee weapon. In a game about agile, powerful Na'vi, this is a massive missed opportunity. The AI is also a bit inconsistent regardless of your difficulty setting. Sometimes enemies are practically blind, failing to see you when you're right in their face. Other times, they can spot you even through the cover. But to its credit, when you're spotted, especially on higher difficulties, enemies can really give you a hard time. It adds a decent challenge, forcing you to play tactically, rely on stealth, or grind out upgrades. Speaking of upgrades, the game handled them interestingly. Skill unlocks provide more damage, a bigger healing pouch, and in general typical RPG stuff. Then there are unique hidden skills that you can usually unlock by doing some platforming challenges. But what makes things truly weird is the character progression system. You see, unlike most of the RPGs, you don't primarily level up by completing quests. What really boosts your level is your gear score. Literally. Get high-grade gear and your level goes up. Now, to get better gear, you're either grinding side quests for clan favor to buy items from each clan's dedicated vendor, or you're hunting wildlife to craft your own, which, to be fair, usually yields better stuff. But this extra gear-dependent step to simply be strong enough can become incredibly frustrating. It feels like a chore, not a rewarding progression. And then there's the traversal. The actual movement isn't bad. Your Na'vi can jump and climb pretty much everything, but your base running speed is painfully slow. The game's odd pacing really hits you in the first few hours, forcing you to slug across vast distances before you finally get your first mount. Sure, you get a sense of the map's scale, and jumping around can be fun for a bit, but it's a drag, and the world doesn't truly open up until you unlock your first mount. Here's where I think the game made a colossal misstep, giving you your Ikran, your flying mount, before unlocking a dire horse. The Ikran is infinitely more versatile. It can take you almost anywhere, even to the highest peaks with zero hassle. Then, halfway through the story, you unlock the ability to tame dire horses, which ends up feeling almost entirely useless, especially since you can't keep them permanently and you have to tame one every single time. Having more traversal options is great in theory, but how and when you unlock them matters too. And since dire horses are harder to find in some areas than others, it makes their inclusion feel like an afterthought. But let's get back to the Ikran. Despite its usefulness, calling it can be unexpectedly annoying at times. If you summon it midair, it spawns right below you, which is cool. But sometimes when you're on the ground, regardless of nearby terrain, the game spawns it 50 to 100 meters away. And since the world is packed with visual clutter, you might lose track of where it landed unless you're constantly watching your compass. It's a small thing, but it adds up and turns a convenient feature into a minor frustration. But perhaps the weirdest issue is how disorienting the world navigation can feel. Open world games are basically my jam, and when it comes to Ubisoft games, for the past decade or so, they've introduced a lot of smart design features into their games that help you navigate these fascinating locations without relying on markers or heads-up display elements, whether through NPC directions or through technically well-designed environments. Yet in Frontiers of Pandora, those ideas are undermined by the game's busy art direction, overwhelming detail, and inconsistent UI. Even when using guided exploration mode, objective markers are sometimes delayed or lost in the clutter, making it hard to find where to go. Early on in the game, even reading the map can feel unintuitive. But to the game's credit, there are some customization options for a UI to fix these things. But this is the only game I've ever played where I genuinely struggled to locate objectives this much. As for the rest of the open world content, instead of truly immersing you in Na'vi culture, you're mostly playing Rambo, taking down outposts or engaging in this very basic detective minigame, interacting with things by going through this hacking minigame for the billionth time, or scanning for the next objective and info on things with your Na'vi vision. There are a few side activities that touch on Na'vi life, but they're few and far between. And when the game does try to showcase Na'vi culture through its side content, the fetch quest design is so blatant, so mind-numbingly repetitive, it's honestly shocking to see in a modern AAA title. The original Avatar movie presented mind-boggling visuals for 2009. Seriously, it still holds up even now in 2025. The sequel was also a visual feast, so when you have films that consistently push the boundaries of what's possible, you expect its video game counterpart to at least try and echo that ambition in its own medium. I was not expecting real-time rendered graphics to match a multi-million-dollar James Cameron film, of course not. But I was expecting something that truly lived up to the Avatar name. Instead, Frontiers of Pandora's visuals are a complicated matter, a double-edged sword if you will. On one hand, the world of Pandora itself is stunning. The open world is incredible, the sheer density of details in every nook and cranny is just astonishing, and this is where Ubisoft almost without fail knocks it out of the park every single time. It doesn't matter if it's golden hour, the bioluminescent flora during the nighttime, or the insane draw distances showing off those massive floating rocks that you can actually fly to. There's always something trying to catch your eye. The faithfulness to the movie's aesthetics is praiseworthy, no doubt. But then there's the other edge of that sword. The animations, the NPCs, and even the wildlife, this is where the illusion starts to break. Firstly, the animation quality is rough, and that's putting it mildly, especially for a modern Ubisoft title. It's like they've either lost the tech they once had, or they're just not willing to invest in making characters move convincingly anymore. You'll often see characters, both human and Na'vi, just awkwardly existing. They hit this weird pose when standing still. Their movements are robotic, animations are incredibly limited and repetitive, and most of the time NPCs are just frozen in place, not doing much of anything. And while the world looks alive on the surface, it often feels dead. Wildlife and NPCs rarely interact. I think I saw it happen maybe once or twice. And that was only because I forced the situation. They generally don't hunt or react to each other dynamically. It's these missing layers of detail that make this beautiful world feel disappointingly static. So you have this jarring contrast. A world that's undeniably gorgeous on the surface, but populated by animations and character behaviors that just can't match that initial wow factor. It ends up feeling shallow, unable to compete with the top tier games from years ago, let alone approach the immersive quality of the Avatar films. That gorgeous outer shell just doesn't have the support it needs. Have you ever played a game that's so aggressively mid that you have no real reason to hate it but absolutely none to love it either? A game that doesn't try to do anything special and isn't even best in class at what it's trying to do? That's how Avatar Frontiers of Pandora feels. It's set in a world brimming with potential and rich with visual detail that initially draws you in. Yet Ubisoft Massive slapped the Far Cry formula onto it in the worst possible way, trimming out the fun and leaning into surface level mechanics better suited for a generic military shooter. Frontiers of Pandora never aspires to be great. It doesn't strive to be memorable in any single aspect. It has all the hallmarks of a project pushed out to fulfill a licensing obligation, not a passion project and certainly not something innovative. This isn't a game I'll miss, and frankly if it wasn't for my interest in Pandora I wouldn't have even bothered buying it. There were so many other paths Ubisoft could have taken, but instead they chose the safe route with poor writing, outdated quest design and stiff animations. Sometimes other developers take the same safe approach to gameplay, yet still deliver something memorable, whether it's through great writing, a clever gameplay hook, or unforgettable art direction. Avatar fails to do any of that. Instead, Ubisoft massively leaned on gear scores, unnecessary grind, and tired RPG tropes to try and keep players hooked. And that's the reality of Frontiers of Pandora and frankly most of the other current Ubisoft titles. Now everyone's entitled to their opinion. If you played this game and genuinely enjoyed it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But from a critical standpoint, it's a mediocre game leaning heavily toward the lower end of that mid-spectrum, and I absolutely would not recommend you spend your time and money on it. In the end, despite its visual beauty and powerful IP, Avatar Frontiers of Pandora brought nothing new, said nothing memorable, and didn't connect with players on any deeper level. And unfortunately, that's why it failed to matter. But what about you? Why do you think Frontiers of Pandora failed to stay relevant? Let me know in the comments.